السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah ta'ala, today we'll go through one verse only in Surah At-Taghabun, which is verse number 11. Verse number 11 in the Surah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from it. So let's start with reciting the verse, inshallah. Verse number 11 in Surah At-Taghabun, Surah number 64. Repeat after me, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله. ومن يؤمن بالله يهد قلبه. والله بكل شيء عليم. ما أصاب, this is mad, takes 4 to 5 counts. ما أصاب من مصيبة, ميم نون after it, ميم إدغام with a غنة with a tone. مصيبة إلا, there's no غنة here because the hamza after the tanween. إلا بإذن الله. ومن إدغام with غنة. ومن يؤمن بالله, نون with سكون after باء إقلاب. ومن يؤمن بالله يهدي قلبه. والله بكل شيء عليم. Now, the translation: no disaster or musiba or calamity strikes except by permission of Allah, and whoever believes in Allah, He will guide his heart, and Allah is knowing of all things. This ayah is a principle, a foundation in the belief in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's one of the pillars of al-Iman. And it's clearly, as we heard stated, ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله. There's no musiba, and we'll talk about the musiba, calamity, disaster, something that a person doesn't like to happen to him, whether it's on a personal level or upon a group of people or upon the entire ummah. Right? So anything that happens, ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله, except by the permission of Allah. Except by the permission of Allah. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he said, except by the commands of Allah. That means this is what Allah decreed and this is what Allah willed. So if a person knows that and believes in this, then the next statement in the verse, وَمَن يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ, and whoever believes in Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide his heart. And guide his heart to be pleased with the qadr of Allah. And يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ, even though it's translated as guide, but really it means in this context, as also Ibn Abbas he said, means يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ لِلْيَقِينِ, that whoever believes in Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide his heart to al-yaqeen, to have certainty, which means that he would know that whatever afflicted him of bad or anything that he doesn't like, it wasn't never meant for him to be missed or not to have it, because it's already happened. And whatever missed him was never meant for him to have it. This is, after it happened, we get to know that this is the qadr of Allah. And also, as Alqama, he said that when he was asked about this verse, he said, it's when the man, a musiba or a calamity afflicted him, and he knows that it's from Allah. This is the part of the belief. To believe, you have to believe in this. That if something happened, this is from Allah. Yes, of course, the musiba, if it happens, it might be from, as far as a person seeing or witnessing the creation of Allah doing something. Someone harms someone, things happens physically. And that's always something to be witnessed in the hearts of the believers. It doesn't take away the responsibility of human beings, but to know that this, since it happened, it was the qadr of Allah, and still people are responsible for their actions. So, for example, if someone, hits someone and as a result of that, he loses his eyesight, for example. The person that lost his eyesight, it already happened. He has two things to be observed here. The most important is the fact that this is something that is a calamity that afflicted him. And he knows that this is part of the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he will be pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he would be patient with the commands of Allah and so on. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that he's pleased with the one that did that to him. He can still seek justice from him and things like that. And it doesn't take away the fact that he's pleased with Allah. So, and also as the implications to this is to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and that's the yaqeen. To Allah we belong and to Allah we shall return. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, عَجَبًا لِلْمُؤْمِنِ, amazing is the affairs of the believers. And this is not to anyone but the believer. لَا يَقْضِي اللَّهُ لَهُ قَضَاءً إِلَّا كَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. One of the narrations, there's no qada, there's no decree that Allah decrees for him unless it's good for him. So that means all the qada of Allah, all the qadar of Allah is good. And the Prophet ﷺ explained, إِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ ضَرَّاءَ صَبَرْ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. If something harmful or something bad happens to him, and he's patient, and it's good for him. وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ سَرَّاءَ شَكَرْ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. And if something sarra, matter of ease, happens to him, and he's grateful to Allah, and it's good for him. So that means at the end, for the believers, and it's only for the believers, both situations is good for him. Because he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with different acts of worship according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him. Right? So the ayah is a very clear statement, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, that everything is by the permission of Allah. And anything that comes as a result of the permission of Allah, or the command of Allah, that means it is something that is good. And it doesn't mean that a person should ask for calamities, of course not. It's something that is already happened. So it's only for these things that already happened. Before things happen, people take the means to protect themselves. They make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them the best of this life and in the hereafter. And this is, you don't need to really encourage people to stay away from trouble too much, because that's something that is normal for those who are sane, that they would take the means and the measures not to harm themselves. Right? That's why that what needs to be given more attention is what happens afterwards, is to be pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to have the yaqeen, the certainty that since the matter is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means it's good for the person, that means he's being tested, that means he needs to be patient, he needs to be grateful, and so on. And the word also, وَمَا يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ, whoever believes in Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide his heart, which shows that the guidance, there's the major the general guidance and the specific guidance. The general guidance is that everybody is shown what is right and what is wrong. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the people of Thamud, وَأَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَهَدَيْنَاهُم فَاسْتَحَبُّوا الْعَمَى عَلَى الْهُدَى. As for Thamud, we guided them, but they chose blindness over guidance. What is the meaning of we guided them? That means the dalala wal irshad, the bayan wal irshad, for them to be shown what is right and what is wrong. This is guidance. You guided someone when you show them the right path. Whether that person took that path or not, that's another type of guidance. But the first one is there. That means you show them the guidance. The second one is hidayatul tawfiq, the guidance to do what is good. And that is the guidance of the heart. And that's also related to the next verse, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ. And we'll talk about that inshallah ta'ala tomorrow. Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah, since we're going through his tafsir, he said, ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله. There's no musibah that afflicts a person unless it's by the permission of Allah. He said, and this is general to all the masa'ib, all the calamities, all the disasters, all the things that is as a normal human being would dislike to happen to him, whether it's in oneself, whether it's sickness, whether it's pain, whether it's loss of something, whether it's matters of wealth, loss of wealth, or loss of job, or whatever. Walad in one's offsprings, loss of a child, sickness of a child, anything like that, and the loved ones in general, and the like of this. So anything that happens or afflicts a person is by the qadar of Allah. That means it's in the previous knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's been written, recorded, and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is established. It just came into existence. Otherwise, it was already in the qadar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's by the great wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing is the like of him, and he's the most wise. So he says then afterwards, a statement saying, وَالشَّأْنُ كُلُّ الشَّأْنُ, means what really, really matters, right, is what? Usually when it comes into the subject of musibah or calamity, it's the concern of the musibah, things like this. No, what really matters is, would the abd, the slave of Allah, fulfill his job that is upon him in this situation, or he doesn't? As we know that we are created to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and we have jobs to be done, which is the ubudiyyah to Allah, to worship Allah. So it's time for Salatul Fajr. What's your job? Your job is not to buy and sell. Your job is not to sleep. Your job is not to help others with anything. Your job is to make the salah, because it's time for Fajr. So what is the job of the believer, the job of the slave of Allah, when something bad happens to him, when a calamity afflicts him? If he fulfill his job, mashallah, he got the greatest reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if he doesn't, that means he is subjecting himself to the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the job of the person when something bad happens to him is that if he believes that this is from Allah, to believe that this is from Allah, because that's what the ayah says. Illa bi-idhnillah. So to believe first that this is from Allah, this is a matter of belief. And if you believe that this is from Allah, does that make you, wal-'iyadhu billah, angry with Allah, or the opposite? Of course, the opposite. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Almighty, the most wise, the most merciful, the most forbearing. So, and nothing is the like of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His wisdom is beyond what we know, beyond what we think. So if you believe that this is from Allah, and that's the first thing to be observed, then you have to be then pleased with that, pleased with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed and afflicted you with. And you would submit yourself, submission to the command of Allah. These are jobs to be observed. And if a person is upon this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide his heart. And that would make the heart not to panic and not to say something haram or to believe in something haram, as what happened to some of the people that their hearts are not guided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide for him at-thabat, to be firm and to act according to the sabr and the patience. So he will get an immediate reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that because he's not terrified and not panicking as others, and with the great reward that is being kept for the person in the hereafter. That's إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. The patient ones are giving their rewards without an account, without limits. And also we get to know from this that whoever does not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whenever the calamities afflicts them, that means he did not witness the qadar of Allah. He only stood up and saw the means only, did not see the actions of Allah. Many people, the forgetfulness leads people to this. Right? So, and this is a very delicate situation that we need to train ourselves to be always upon. Anything that you dislike in this life, anything that from human beings or from other than human beings, because people think it's only in the things that human beings has nothing to do with it. So if a person is sick, be patient. That's the qadr of Allah. But what if your husband say something bad to you, or your wife is giving you a hard time, or your children are not listening to you, they're disobeying you, and they're causing you to be so upset and angry, right? It applies the same thing here, which means this is something that you dislike. You have to fulfill your job in that situation. One of which is that you witness the qadr of Allah. And you don't just look and become so much occupied with the fact that your husband or your wife or your children did. That would bring you all kinds of miseries, will make you rely upon yourself. Right? So this has to be there as the wazifa, the job of the believers in this case, and to see that this is only happened by the permission of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most wise. So the person has certainty that this is from Allah, and it doesn't mean that you would not take the means to advise to, then you need to, the subject of the knowledge of how to deal with that situation. Does it need for the person to overlook, or it needs to stop this evil, or to take some measures, and things like this? This is something else. But what's very extremely important is to look always at the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on things, and to be able to have the knowledge of how to go about with this, with the heart being content and settled upon the fact that this is from Allah. Otherwise, a person is punishing himself. He's really having a misery in this life, and he takes away from the rewards in the hereafter. So this is at all times, and not to just focus on the asbab or the means. And also, وَمَن يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ. He says this is specifically in the masa'ib or the calamities, not the general meaning of guidance, which is, of course, the general meaning of guidance is there, but specifically when it comes to the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the heart to be guided, to have certainty, for the heart to see the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. And that's the necessities of al-Iman, which basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give that thabat and steadfastness to the believers. And the thabat, or the steadfastness of the heart, and the patience and the certainty, is when the fitna comes. يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give firmness with the firm speech in this life and in the hereafter to the believers. So the people of al-Iman, the people of faith, they are the most guided hearts and the most firm, facing all kinds of disturbing things and things like this, because of what they have in their hearts with al-Iman. So this is a verse that brings all kinds of remedies to our hearts, and that's why the ayah ends, وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with everything alim. He is the unknower subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knows best. That's why if something that happens to a person, it's because of the knowledge of Allah. So you know that Allah knows and you do not know. So there's something that Allah knows, and that's why He tested you with this or so. It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows and we do not know. So how can a person then panic? And so does it mean that a person should not feel pain if it's painful? No, that's something else. There's nothing wrong with, this is the normal thing also for human beings to feel good when something bad happens to them. But the heart is, again, is upon the certainty that this is from Allah. A person would not say anything haram. He would not be extreme in whatever afflicts the heart of a musibah, and so on. That's why ما أصاب from صاد واو باء, which means strikes or afflicts. من مصيبة, any musibah. Musibah here is nakira. That means any musibah, whether it's small or major. So it's anything that hits the person in a negative way, misfortune, calamity, anything. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called death a musiba in the Quran and things like this. إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, except by the permission of Allah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the dominion of the heavens and the earth, as it's mentioned in the beginning of the surah. إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَمَا يُؤْمِنَ, a conditional statement. Whoever believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يَهْدِي قَلْبَهُ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide his heart. He will guide his heart from هاء دال ياء. والله بكل شيء عليم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide our hearts and keep us steadfast upon the deen. طيب, barakallahu feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all and give us our rewards, inshallah, and make us among the people of the Quran. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.